Welcome to the Climate Eye podcast. What do you solve? Where we sit down with global game changers on climate. I'm Kevin Drolet, aka Kadro, and I'm here with my co-founder, co-host Mike Higgins, aka Higo. And we are excited to jump right in and learn from Alex Wright-Gladstein, founder and CEO of Sphere. Alex is a serial climate entrepreneur and previously co-founded Air Labs, an MIT spinout developing optical chip technology to dramatically reduce energy use in data centers. Sphere, however, is redefining retirement options by helping employers and individuals align their 401k and retirement savings with a clean energy future through climate-friendly index funds. And this story and her journey gets very interesting. So thank you for joining us, Alex. And now I will turn it over to my partner in climate, Higo, to kick us off.
Well, good morning, Alex. Love having you on the show. Can't wait to get into this. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for
Um,
having me.
we always start with the question that names the show. So I'll just go ahead and then would love to hear the story because there's a big story behind it. But Alex, what do you solve?
So we're solving a problem that I experienced myself when I was running my first company, IR Labs. We were cutting, and we still are, we're cutting the energy use of AI in half by using light to move data between chips. We spun the technology out of MIT back in 2015. And in 2017, we started offering a retirement plan to our employees. And I asked for a climate friendly option for our employees to invest in the lineup. And I kept just hearing no, essentially, or interesting, let us look into that. And it ended up taking over 3 years and a lot of persistence to finally get one option that at a baseline wasn't invested in fossil fuel companies, which to me was crazy because I was running this climate tech company. And at a climate tech company for over 3 years, we required all of our employees to invest in fossil fuel companies. And it just drove me crazy. So I started trying to learn about the 401k industry to figure out why it had been so hard to get this done. And I ended up learning I wasn't alone. I ended up getting introduced to employees at other companies, at the biggest companies in the world, actually, at Google, at Microsoft, at Apple, who'd been asking for climate friendly investment options on their 401k plans for years. They have tens of billions of dollars in each of these huge 401k plans. And these employees had sent hundreds of emails to HR. They'd gotten thousands of signatures on petitions, and they hadn't been able to get climate friendly options on their 401k plans either, for the same reason that I couldn't as CEO asking service providers to get it done. And the reason is because there are tons of lawsuits in the world of 401ks, and they tend to fall into two categories. There's the excessive fee lawsuit and the underperformance lawsuit. And climate friendly funds have existed for a long time, but they've been actively managed, which means they have high fees because you're paying someone extra to research and pick stocks. And sometimes they outperform, but sometimes they underperform just because they're actively managed. Every actively managed fund just sometimes does well, sometimes doesn't. All you know is they're not going to track the market at large because by definition, they're not index funds. And so, of course, these actively managed climate friendly funds were going to be tough to put on 401ks, right? They just don't check the boxes of what these 401k fiduciaries are looking for. And so I decided to start Sphere to launch the first climate friendly fund that is an index fund. And so we launched the Sphere 500 Climate Fund, and it has low fees and it performs in a way that's 99% correlated to the S&P 500. So it's easy to add to any 401k plan, no matter what platform it's on.
I think I'm like most Americans. I have no idea what's in my 401k fund, but that has to change because I'm sure it's weighted fossil fuels, and fossil fuels are underperforming, as we talked about previously. But, you mentioned lawsuits, right? And I thought, wow, that's really timely. Speaking of lawsuits, in your LinkedIn feed, you posted a story in Fast Company about Coldwell Banker and an employee, filing a lawsuit against them for, you know, not considering climate exposure in their 401k choices. And, so we're finally starting to see litigation on this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, that in the context of Sphere and what that presents for you guys moving forward, whether it's an opportunity because it's going to create more awareness, what happens?
This lawsuit is really precedent setting. It's super exciting in this field, and it's been such a long time coming. Because I remember when I was still running IR Labs, and I was hearing over and over again from 401k advisors, the people who act as fiduciaries on these plans, they were saying, well, we can't add a climate friendly fund because we have to only pay attention to financial measures when we're deciding what to put on a 401k plan. And then I would look at the performance of the fossil fuel industry, and it's had the worst returns of any sector of the economy for the past 2 decades. So I was like, on the one hand, you're telling me you can't do this because you have to only pay attention to financial metrics. On the other hand, I'm looking at those financial metrics and they're terrible for fossil fuel companies. So why can't we just take them out? And learning about how lawsuit heavy this industry is, I just kept asking myself, why is no one suing for this reason? Like, it just seems like the writing's on the wall. Like, this has to happen at some point. And it's been in the back of my head ever since then, through founding the company, growing the company, getting to know a lot of different employees. I've just been like, I wonder when. I feel like the tables will turn when eventually the first lawsuit happens that actually focuses on that underperformance and all the money that employees have been losing by being forced to invest in this underperforming industry. And just last week, an employee of Cushman Wakefield, an ex-employee of
Cushman
Cushman
Wakefield.
Wakefield, which
Right.
is a big real estate company, sued for them having in their 401k lineup one specific fund that apparently is just overexposed to climate risk and has had terrible performance. And by the way, really high fees for 5 years that it's been on the 401k lineup of this real estate company. And meanwhile, apparently, Cushman Wakefield, in speaking with shareholders and talking about what they do as their core line of business, they acknowledge climate risk and how important that is as a
Right.
part of financial risk all the time when talking about their products. But at the same time, when they're investing their employees' hard earned money, this is deferred income for their employees, they're having them invest in this very climate risky fund. And so it's a brand new kind of lawsuit. This has never happened before in the world of 401ks, where it's really just focusing on the fact that climate risk is financial risk. So it fits, on the one hand, directly into the type of lawsuit that has been happening for decades already in 401ks. But it's the first time that anyone is tying climate risk to that financial risk. So I'm really excited to see what comes of it. And I think regardless of where this lawsuit ends up, a lot of 401k lawsuits end up getting settled out of court. And even if that happens for this one, it still tends to be a wake up call across the whole industry where 401k advisors, fiduciaries, they pay attention to these lawsuits and they change their behavior to reduce their risks of getting sued based on what's happening. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see 401k fiduciaries pay more attention to climate risk just because of the fact that this lawsuit exists.
I mean, that would set precedent. And once precedent is set, cat's out of the bag.
Well, in the article too, it's interesting is it's from the 2024 As You Sow report found more than 2 million employees from 12 tech center companies basically could have earned $5 billion more in returns had their companies decarbonize their retirement plans. And we learned from you during our initial discussion like this idea that fossil fuel is a better bet, it's actually a worse bet. And you were developing Sphere. And I think that's super important because as you're redefining where do we invest our money, what impact that can have. This is not just like, hey, it's guys, it's environmentally friendly. Hey, this is going to save the climate what we do with our money. But it's actually like, hey, you're getting ripped off. Like you're not getting as much on return. But can you talk a little bit about how Sphere addresses that? Like what and then also I think like I would be really interested to learn like your development with Sphere. Like how did the story behind Sphere in the company a little bit more deeply?
Yeah, until we came along, climate friendly investing really fell into two categories. There was uh, what I'll call climate tech investing, where it's funds that let you invest in solar and wind companies, like the future of the climate friendly economy. So, very much concentrated in one industry. And just as investing in any one industry has risk, right? Because industries have their ups and downs, investing in only solar and wind and battery technology, you're concentrating your bets. So it doesn't really make sense to invest all of your life savings in one industry, right? The same way it wouldn't make sense to concentrate in any other industry. But there have been funds that do that in the past. They just haven't made their way onto 401k plans very much at all. And then the other type of climate friendly investing has been assessing all the companies in the economy and trying to pick the ones that are better for the planet as a whole. Like we only invest in good companies. which there's so many different ways to define good companies, right? And I'm sure a lot of people by these days has heard of the term ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance investing. And the only thing that ESG funds all have in common is that they use those three words to define the acronym ESG, environmental, social, and governance. But beyond that, every ESG fund did ESG differently. And so it was just really hard to tell, like, what exactly is each ESG fund doing? Because they're all different. And you would generally be paying someone to assess, and they'd each have their own metrics of like, is this company better or worse for the world? And oftentimes they conflicted with each other. One would say Tesla does great on ESG metrics. The other one would say they fail all our ESG metrics. And there was a lot of confusion, and now that term has fallen out of favor, which I think is probably a good thing because it didn't provide very much clarity to just regular people trying to figure out what they're investing in. Even before ESG fell out of favor, I never liked that term, so we never used that for our own. We kind of came up with this new approach to climate friendly investing that's much more simple. We just want it to be super transparent. So, number one, we don't invest in fossil fuel companies or other companies whose core line of business is not compatible with a climate safe future. So, we don't
Mhm.
invest in lead contributors to deforestation. We don't invest in private prison operators or tobacco companies or weapons manufacturers. We think that if we want to have a climate safe future, we need to be giving everyone in our society an equal seat at the table. And none of the companies that have their core line of business in those areas are uplifting all humans, people, and planet to put us on a path to where we need to be. We still invest in 400 out of the top 500 companies in the US. And we still invest in the vast majority from a market capitalization perspective of the S&P 500 companies. And so that's why our fund is 99% correlated to the S&P 500, because among the S&P 500, most of your money is getting invested in the top 10 biggest companies because it's market cap weighted. And so we're investing in the same top 10 companies because none of those are fossil fuel companies or deforestation companies. It's big tech, honestly. It's Google, Microsoft, Apple, Tesla, etc. And all of these companies do bad things when it comes to the planet. So we're not trying to be the entity judging whether a company is good or bad. Their core line of business, we do think is compatible with a climate safe future. So we invest. And then the other thing that we do is we use the power of our vote to get these companies to do better for people and planet. And this is something that I don't think is talked about nearly enough, especially in 401ks. Most people don't realize when you're investing in a 401k, you are a shareholder. You have the power to vote, to elect the board. The board elects, they hire and fire the CEO of companies. And at the end of the day, shareholders are the ultimate decision makers for how companies operate. So it's not just through hiring and firing the board, but it's also through shareholder proposals, which any shareholder can bring forth a proposal and try to get other shareholders to vote for that proposal and really set the direction of the company. So what we do is we always vote in favor of climate change related shareholder proposals. And that's a huge departure from what any other fund manager that you'll find in your 401k typically today is doing. Because these days, most funds in 401ks are index funds, and index funds, there are almost no other index funds out there besides ours that actually think about how they vote, let alone for people and planet. The vast majority of index funds, and I think probably all index funds that are available in 401k plans, automatically vote however the management of the company recommends. And because management is financially incentivized to have short-term thinking to maximize quarterly returns, oftentimes they're, 98% of the time actually, they're recommending to vote against climate change related shareholder proposals. So for example, shareholder proposal to install solar at Costco. Management recommends against it because it's an upfront cost. We vote for it. We believe that it makes sense to pay that upfront cost because you earn your money back in 2 to 3 years, and then you're just saving money for the company for the rest of all time, right? And because we invest on behalf of people saving for retirement, we know they have a long-term time preference. 5, 10, 15, 20, even 30 years is what our investors are thinking about. And so it really aligns our goals, where if you're thinking about long-term returns and maximizing shareholder value for the long term, that we have found universally aligns with protecting people and planet.
So you've gotten a lot of traction so far in your journey. But one question I have to ask is, Well, I guess you talked about like coming from AR Labs and then getting into Sphere, right? Which is it's a pretty big leap. And so you're looking at your original company going, hey, like this doesn't exist. But can you talk a little bit about the exploration process for you? I'm just curious, like as you're moving, because they're pretty different industries, right? Like your first and second startup. But can you just talk a little about that story? Like, you know, was it eye-opening? You know, what were your aha moments as you went into this journey?
Yeah, it was a big surprise to me. I never thought I'd start a firm in finance. I expected to be a serial entrepreneur spinning technologies out of labs over and over again. I first found out about climate change when I was 12 years old in my science class. And I couldn't stop thinking about it ever since then. And I kind of spent my whole high school time period just trying to figure out what kind of job can I have to have a positive impact on climate. And I did the same thing in college, actually. I started our energy club and did a lot of internships and ended up learning about someone who had been a serial entrepreneur. His name was Larry Bach. He had gone to labs across the country trying to meet the smartest people in nanotech and convincing them to spin out their technologies. Nanotech was a big buzzword at the time in kind of the early 2000s. He had spun 20 different technologies out of labs, started 20 different companies. 14 of them had gone public. And learning about his career, I was like, oh, serial entrepreneurship is a career choice? I want to do that, but for climate tech. So I ended up, first I realized I should probably have some business experience if I was going to be the business co-founder of tech spinouts. So I worked at a smart grid company for 5 years straight out of college called Enernoc. And then I went to MIT for an MBA, really as an excuse to meet people across campus inventing things, which was amazing because there are over 300 labs there that do energy related research. And I got to meet a lot of the people in those labs. And that's how I met my co-founders for my first startup, IR Labs, and they had invented the first ever processor chip to communicate using light. And I was very open with them even before founding the company together that I wanted to be a serial entrepreneur. So it was not a surprise. They knew that we should all be on the lookout for a replacement for me as CEO. Our goal was, or my goal was, to take the company to a place where we could attract in a really top tier CEO from the semiconductor industry. So then I could go and look for a new technology to spin out of a lab. So that's exactly what we did. We found an incredible CEO to bring in. And I started talking to people in labs trying to figure out what technology am I going to spin out next. And I actually got pretty far down the line on some seaweed technology. I
Mm,
thought like carbon capture
yeah,
and like creating like cool new markets for seaweed could be really impactful. But also, a bunch of other things happened in that time. After hiring in the new CEO and starting to explore the landscape, a lot had changed. So I had been all in on the climate community really ever since I was 12 up until founding IR Labs. And then I had like 4 or 5 years there where I was just all in on the semiconductor and photonics industry. And I had stopped going to like climate tech events and climate conferences
Mm.
because I was going to like photonics events and semiconductor conferences. And so I felt like, okay, I need to catch up on what's the state of the art, what's new in innovation in climate. Um, and in the meantime, I also had just noticed that the tone had really changed when it came to climate in a few ways. First, actually, it wasn't just noticing the tone had changed, but I very personally felt like an urgency to like speed up the change on climate because I lived in San Francisco and I think it was 2020, that moment when we had the orange skies, like the crazy amount of fires and smoke. And it wasn't just the orange skies that year. I think it was the fifth year in a row where we had a fire season.
yeah.
And being a California native, I was like, this is not normal. Like, we didn't have a fire season every year, every summer, and just
Mhm.
sky turns orange or black. And I was just like, it feels like something's different, and climate change is speeding up, and this is scary. Um, and I felt that IR Labs is super important for cutting the energy use of computing in half, but that alone won't solve climate change. And so I was really feeling this urgency of like, I need to do more. And I had experienced firsthand spinning a technology out of a lab and bringing it to where it has the scale of impact that it can have takes at least 10 years. Um,
Mm.
And I experienced that firsthand. Like I tried to make it happen faster with IR Labs. I was like, come on, people told me it'll take 10 years, but I can do it in 5, like we'll just speed up that timeline. And like, lo and behold, they were all right, right? Like we are now going to be celebrating the 11-year anniversary of IR Labs. And we're now getting designed in to the big data centers. We're still not deployed in computers everywhere. In a couple years, we should start to be in a lot of computers everywhere, a lot of data centers everywhere. But it's been more than 10 years till we get there, right? Huge impact, but it just takes time. And so I really started thinking about how do I speed that up? And with the technologies I was looking at, I was like, how do we like cut that down? And coming up with like barriers of like, some things just take time. Um, and at the same time, I was just really blown away by the tone of people as I talked to them about climate
Yeah.
change. Because I had felt like my whole life, I had been like kind of this crazy person in the corner being like, hey guys, we should be worried about this climate change thing. And people were like, yeah, whatever. Uh, and all of a sudden in 2020, I would bring up climate change with really anyone, and they would lean in and be like, yes, I'm worried too. What can we do?
Mm,
And I was like, whoa, why does everyone care now? Like, what changed? And I looked up the statistics, and like, lo and behold, all of a sudden, over 80% of Americans are worried about climate change. And that includes
yeah.
a majority of Democrats and Republicans. It was like 53% of Republicans. And I was like, we have arrived. Like, this is what I've been hoping for my whole life. Like, everyone cares universally now. This is incredible. And I was like, wait a second, why haven't we solved it? Like, if everyone's on the same page, this is a problem, we need to fix it. Why haven't we fixed it? And I realized it's because we all live in systems that are slow to change. And I started obsessing over systems change and thinking, how do we speed up systems change? And I kept coming back to money, like money being one of the most powerful things for speeding up systems change. And then that kept bringing me back to this annoying side project I had with the 401k of our labs, where I was like, that has to do with money. How much money is in 401ks? I looked it up. At the time, it was $30 trillion in retirement savings. That's grown now. There's $45 trillion in retirement savings just in the US alone. This problem exists around the world. Um, I was like, oh, that's a huge amount of money that's holding the status quo in place. Maybe I shouldn't be thinking about spinning a technology out of a lab. Maybe I should be thinking about moving that huge amount of money. Because if we can start to shift those trillions, that's how we can start to change the systems we live in more quickly and have a chance to turn this thing around. So, very long winded way of saying
Oh,
that's why I
so
moved
good.
from deep tech to finance.
Well, I, for one, am really glad you made that choice to be serial because this is enormously beneficial. And there's so much to unpack on what you just said. One of the things that you're doing with this is you're giving each of us, something else we can do individually. And
Yeah.
maybe if I do it by myself, it doesn't have an impact, right? But if millions of people do it, it starts to have an impact. Kevin and I have solar on our house. Is that going to make a meaningful difference in the world? No. But
Yes,
when
yes, it will.
the
It's so
little
important.
trickles, right? But millions of people do it, it changes everything, right?
Exactly.
And that's why we compost here. We're just like, I've got 3 kids, they see it happening, so I'm influencing them and it spreads out like that. And that's one of the things we're doing now. This is something else we can all do that has an impact. And I think that that's super meaningful. I'm thinking about like the average worker listening to our podcast. I want to give them something tangible that they could be asking, you know, about the retirement plans to the folks that manage it. You know,
Yeah.
what would that be?
Yeah. It's super simple. They can shoot an email to their head of HR or head of benefits, or if it's a small organization, just maybe the head of the organization and say, hey, can we ask our 401k providers for a climate friendly investment option in the lineup? You can ask for Sphere specifically. We are the only one that's really designed to check the boxes of what the 401k fiduciaries will be looking for. And just send in the request because it turns out those 401k advisors, the ones who kind of put together the 401k plan for the organization, they really care about keeping their customers happy. So when they get these requests from HR managers, they really pay attention. And HR managers care about keeping employees happy. So if an employee asks the head of HR for this, they generally just go ahead and forward it on to the 401k provider. And so all it can take is just a single email from you to your head of HR to get the wheels moving. And then if they do push back, because we do hear pushback all the time of, oh, we can't do this because we have to make decisions just based on financial metrics, blah, blah, blah. You know, the story I was hearing, a CEO asking for this for a long time, and a lot of them haven't heard the data about fossil fuel underperformance, or they haven't heard about Sphere yet. And so if you need help responding to some of that pushback or kind of overcoming complacency within that organization that controls the 401k, just reach out to us at hello@oursphere.org. And we do a lot of just supporting employees in crafting emails, really like collecting the data and sharing the data to show, hey, this is something that we can do as an organization. And Mike, you're right. Like it turns out that just moving your money can have a bigger impact than installing solar or driving an electric car. And it's so much easier to do, right? Like for a lot of people, installing solar, buying an electric car is out of reach financially. This doesn't cost anything. Anyone can do it. And you can do it for your own money if you invest outside your current employer's 401k with any prior 401k or IRA. You have total control over that, so you can invest it however you want. But then if you do get it added to your current employer 401k, you're moving not only your own money, but making it possible for all your colleagues to do the same thing. And that's where you can move millions, or if you work at a really big company, potentially billions, to help get us to a healthy planet. So it's super powerful what individuals can do within their own spheres of influence.
I was going to ask you to tell the story because I know, sort of speaking of that, of like how just before the show you were saying you were excited because Sphere is growing and there's a lot of good things happening. Can you talk about how you've been able to grow and I know you, for example, got like the Actors Guild and some other there's been some other traction and awareness created, but can you talk about how that came and then how you were able to take Sphere sort of from its beginnings to where you're at this juncture. And it hasn't been 10 years. So
No, it
yeah.
hasn't.
You're
Yeah,
moving
it just seems
fast.
like things are taking off. So yeah, you're right. Um, so we have two ways that we spread the word and get onto 401k plans. One is through employees requesting us, what we just talked about, and the other is through just educating 401k advisors about the fact that we exist, so that when employees do request us, they've heard of us, they're familiar with us, they like us, and they just simply add us to the plan. And so to do that, we go to the conferences that they go to. We speak on webinars for them, et cetera. And we're just always sharing that data about the fossil fuel underperformance because most of them have never heard of it and they're shocked to see it and intrigued and interested. But when it comes to getting employees to request it, we have supported a number of really cool campaigns just to spread the word. And it's turned out this is an issue that a lot of people care about. Like, it turns out when people find out about this, they oftentimes can't stop thinking about it and really want to spread the word. And that's been true of regular people and also of celebrities. So we did um, a campaign we called the Virtual March to Retire Big Oil, where we brought in a lot of different nonprofits and for-profits that work in this space, and we let anybody upload a picture of themselves, and we created this. This was back when like the AI image generation technology had really taken off a couple years ago, and we created this little AI engine that made this image of you marching down Wall Street asking for a climate friendly option in your 401k, and you could set it in like a futuristic New York with spaceships flying by, or like have wild animals marching with you. Like, it was just a fun
So
thing
awesome.
people could
Yeah.
participate in from anywhere. And we ended up getting a lot of celebrities participating in that, and a number of them were actors. And so I ended up just looking up the public filings for the Screen Actors Guild, the SAG-AFTRA pension, to see, okay, it seems like a lot of actors care about this. Let's see how heavily their pension is invested in fossil fuel companies. And every 401k and pension has to file information publicly, and so you can just look it up. So I looked it up, and it turns out they have over $200 million invested in the fossil fuel industry from the SAG pension. So I went to actually a fundraiser for the Jane Fonda Climate PAC. And because I thought, I know Jane Fonda will be there, and I bet she would care about this. So if I can just like get a minute with her and share this statistic with her, maybe she would care and want to do something about it. And that's exactly what happened. So I told her, did you know, at the time I had figured out at least 100 million is invested in fossil fuels on their pensions. So I told her, did you know there's at least 100 million invested this way? And she was shocked and appalled and took my phone out of my hand and put her direct cell phone number in it and was like, let's do something about this.
That's amazing.
And so, once you have one big name, it becomes much easier to get other actors on board. So we ended up getting Mark Ruffalo, Zoe Deschanel. We now have over 500 actors who have signed an open letter to the SAG pension managers asking for the full removal of investments in fossil fuel companies that they have in the SAG pension. And yeah, before doing the open letter, we brought in a nonprofit called Stand.Earth to kind of help support the actors in that campaign. They engaged the SAG pension. The SAG pension didn't do it after a year of being asked to, and so that's why the actors went public. And it was kind of exciting when the actors went public because they all posted across their social media. It got a lot of press, and a lot of regular people learned, wow, the SAG pensions invest in fossil fuels. Wait, is my 401k invested in fossil fuels? And so it's just been another campaign that's really been successful in spreading the word about the fact that we're all invested in fossil fuels and we can all do something about it. I think we've gotten over 200 million views on that campaign so far. And, the actors are encouraging people to email their HR and move their own money too. So it's been exciting.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's such a great story of, I mean, I just like the boldness of it. I like the boldness of, I'm gonna go meet Jane Fonda and figure this thing out. But it's also interesting because it is like, it's a reputable, not a reputable, it's a repeatable process, right? It's a repeatable process that you know, people can band together and go make these demands. They don't have to necessarily be actors, but they can band together and go make these demands.
Yeah.
I want to just ask you this question. The the impetus to make the change in some ways is like, hey, we care about the climate. That's super important. We don't want to invest in fossil fuels. But I'm always coming back to like this Maslow's hierarchy of needs and that people kind of like make financial decisions, right? At base. And really they should make these investments because it's a better investment. And I wanted to get your take on from a messaging standpoint, do they both have traction? Do you see one having more traction than the other? Do they kind of go together? What's the feedback like as you're going out? Are people responding to, yes, like let's have a better investment and save the, climate, or is it, hey, let's save the climate and have a better investment? I'm just kind of curious, just because you sit in that world.
They're
Mm.
both super effective messages. And we ask ourselves that question all the time. Which one should we focus on first? Which one is more effective? And I actually don't know the answer. I find both are super effective. I
Hmm.
think probably people who self-identify as like being kind of environmental or, advocates or caring a lot about climate change, if they hear, hey, this is the most impactful thing I can do, that really motivates them. And maybe for people who aren't spending their days thinking about climate change, maybe the financial motivation is bigger. I don't know. Definitely for the 401k advisors, those fiduciaries making the decisions, that financial case is key. When we're going to the conferences, we're focusing on the financial case.
Yeah, I can see that. But the answer is both.
Both, you don't
But
have to choose.
both.
And it's funny because the fossil fuel
It's a two for one.
industry, it is, and the fossil fuel industry has actually created this kind of phony pushback on, like, it has seemed like there's been an uprising, like a popular uprising against ESG as a way of investing. But if you actually look under the hood, there's been some amazing investigative journalism showing that actually it's just the fossil fuel companies that have been paying lawmakers to pass laws and been, paying influencers to talk about. Really, it's kind of amazing the consistency of how they use the same line across the board, whether it's on the floor of the Senate or on Fox News. They keep saying, well, you got to choose between investing with your progressive values or investing for good returns. That phrase has been repeated so many times ever since 2022 when the war on ESG started. And it's just incredible how coordinated the different groups are. And now the New York Times, Influence Map, they've put out these amazing pieces of investigative journalism tying back those laws passing that are pushed back on ESG. And these campaigns to just money coming from the fossil fuel companies paying for that to happen. And it's really worked because when people hear something over and over again, they start to believe it. And I did notice starting in 2022, more and more talking to people, they'd be like, well, I care about the planet, but I can't really afford, like, I don't have that much in retirement savings. They really think they have to make that choice. And the fossil fuel companies know they can see their own performance. They know that it's actually not true. So they're not saying investing with your progressive values results in poor returns because there's no data to back that up. Actually, the funds that do invest in more progressive ways have historically had better returns. So they know they can't say you'll have worse returns, but they do say, well, you got to choose one or the other and put up this false choice for people. And that has worked so well. So really just sharing like, hey, you don't have to choose. You can have both. It's this and is kind of the revolutionary thing that if we can share that message with everyone, then I think we've won.
It's the power of the false narrative, right?
Yeah.
Powerful. Your story about SAG was super interesting with their exposure in fossil fuels and the fact that nobody knew, right? It makes me
Yeah.
think there's an agentic solution here for you guys, which is any employee could come to a tool and say, this is my retirement account, and it could run and gather the fossil fuel exposure and bring it back and say, yeah, your fund has this much fuel exposure, right? And then what you could do from an analytics perspective is you could roll all that up and say, what companies where are the employees most interested in this and who's banging on this the most? I don't know. Just dropped in my mind as a
Yeah, we've actually built a tool. We call it the Atmosphere Starter. And you can go to our website, rsphere.org, and find the Atmosphere Starter. Anyone can access it. It's free. You can type in the name of any company and look up the fossil fuel exposure of your company's 401k.
Hmm.
already done then. Okay.
Already done. We built it before AI. AI has really taken off in a serious way just since last month, February. And this was built a couple years ago. So, hearing you say agentic does have my wheels turning of like, we need to go in and update the engine because I think we can make that tool more powerful. Right now, it has some assumptions which are listed in the tool, and you get some averages. But I think we could actually get rid of some of those assumptions and just have like very specific, accurate data using the AI tools that are available just as of the past month.
Well, then it could also do outreach automatically to any company that was requested. It could go to the director of HR and just say, hey, just by the way,
Yeah.
employees from your organization today were looking for climate safe alternatives in their retirement savings accounts. Just thought you'd be interested in that.
Yeah.
Just pepper them into
Yes.
submission, you know,
Yes.
or you could
Totally.
hire us to do it. No, I'm kidding.
I thought you made this really important point about systems change being slow. And
Yeah.
I think about that also all the time with systems change. And that, getting people in behavioral change, you can actually do it pretty quick. Like
Yeah.
if you take Mike and I have talked about like, you know, plastic bags at a grocery store. Law gets passed, you charge 10 cents. All of a sudden, people who are like, I gotta bring my cloth bag. No, they got their cloth bag. It's part of their accessory, and they're all happy to have, it's like it's part of what they're doing. Everybody feels great about it, right? And it's a pretty quick change. You can literally see that change happening overnight. But there's a system that actually has to change first. And I wanted to just get your take on it because this $45 trillion number, I mean, these are big. This is like a big systems change in one of probably most conservative, where we don't want to have like a big change. I mean, we are trained as employees. Don't even look at your 401k. Like somebody else has got the whole thing handled for you. So even just the whole culture
Yeah.
behind the 401k does not lend itself to like, all right, we're going to go and do this. But I
Yeah.
wanted to just kind of get your take on how quickly do you think these systems can change? Like what's your insight on that?
Well, what I found was that there was a huge void in the marketplace for funds that are good for the planet and that are just acceptable for 401ks, where these 401k advisors, heads of HR don't feel like they're putting their neck on the line to potentially get hit with lawsuits by going climate friendly. And so the first step was to launch the fund products that do check the boxes. We have one so far, and we're planning to launch a lot more funds that will check those boxes across every asset class, and even ones that can be the default option and be added to any 401k platform, whether the company uses Fidelity or Vanguard or Schwab or whatever. So it can be available everywhere, because that just hasn't existed. There haven't been options that can be added despite, and I think that's why, the thousands of employees at Google and the thousands of employees at Microsoft who've been asking for this haven't been getting it. It's because there just haven't been products that meet the criteria of what these 401k fiduciaries look for. So I think the hard part about the system change has been getting those products into the marketplace. And that is not easy at all, I will say.
Mhm.
The 401k industry is very insular and extremely hard to break into. And before starting Sphere, I heard from lots of people, oh, you're thinking about starting a fund company that will offer funds into 401ks? We tried that. We failed. Like, don't even bother. It's impossible to break in. And looking at the landscape, it makes sense. The funds that are in 401ks come from these huge asset management companies, right? It's like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, and
Mhm.
they've dominated for decades now, and there haven't really been newcomers breaking into that space. There have been newcomers breaking into ETFs, like launching ETFs and having big success there, but ETFs are not allowed on 401k platforms. So where ETFs have taken off is outside 401ks, but none of them inside 401ks, which is where regular people who just are saving for retirement typically don't have a lot of money they're investing outside their 401ks. Like, that's it for them, right? And that's who we want to serve. And so breaking in to that system was incredibly hard. They don't publicize the criteria for getting your fund onto Fidelity or onto Schwab. It took us years to kind of to figure out how to get added to these platforms, but finally we are added. We have broken in. And so I do think that was the hardest part to changing the system, was just breaking in and getting on all the major 401k platforms. And that's something we just accomplished in this past year. Beyond that, I do think it's easier, because at the end of the day, like I said, the advisors, those 401k advisors who are the biggest influencers of the decision of whether to add a fund to a lineup, they care about keeping their customers happy. And the social movement exists already. These employees have been asking for this kind of thing for a decade now. The Microsoft employees started this campaign in 2016, like way before I was even working on this or even thinking about it for IR Labs. So the social movement exists. Now one product finally exists, and we'll be launching more. And now that our first product is on the major platforms, it will be much easier for us to add all our subsequent products onto those platforms when we do launch them. And so it's just going to be a matter of launching climate-friendly versions of everything that's typically in a 401k, and then growing that social movement that's existed for a long time, getting more and more people to request this. But this is something that, at the end of the day, it's our money. We should be
Yeah.
able to invest our money however we want. We shouldn't have other people telling us, no, you can't, right? Especially because it just makes financial sense. And so I do think it's inevitable that this is going to happen, and it's going to become the standard way of investing in 401ks and outside of 401ks in a few years from now. And it's just so empowering for regular people to know that, like, hey, you can have a huge impact in making that change happen just by going within your sphere of influence. So it's especially in this world where we can feel like we have so little influence on what's happening in the world, and in climate change, where it seems like such a big systems change problem, where, like, what can little old me do? This is one area where actually you can have an outsized impact, and that's empowering for people. So I'm seeing people really take action.
Well, that narrative has to change between the person and the fund manager, for sure. Because, when I think about all the times I've talked to my fund manager, which has happened a lot, once a year, they
Yeah.
always they talk about what percent stocks, what percent bonds, and then they say things like high risk, medium risk, low risk, right? Or
Yeah.
they'll say large cap distribution or small cap distribution, and then okay, so we're going to go 60/40, we're going to go this, we're going to go. They don't mention funds. They don't mention the businesses in the funds. They don't mention, like, hey, talk to me about what matters to you.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, what do you think about these things? What's your feeling about fossil fuel? You don't have those conversations at
Yeah.
all. And quite honestly, until, listening to you, it would have never cross my mind to even ask or to even know I could ask.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
And
You know,
it's in their benefit to bring it up because it turns out when people realize they can have a positive impact on the planet with their investments, they start investing more. We see people contributing to their 401ks who've never contributed in the past because they're like, wait a second, I can have a positive impact through this. We see people who have been contributing increasing those contribution rates. And that impacts the 401k advisors, the wealth advisors. Like they oftentimes make money based off of some percentage of what you invest. And so they should
Mhm.
be talking about the climate impact, the impact on people that these investments have, because when people get excited about a positive impact with their investments, they invest more, and that actually makes more money for the asset management industry.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so interesting. I can't wait to call. My guy's name is Alex. I'm going to call Alex. I'm going to harass him,
And
chase him down.
if he won't let you do it, there are a lot of wealth advisors who um, are part of bigger organizations and they're kind of handcuffed in what they can do. They need some higher level chief investment officer to approve a fund before they can offer the fund to their clients. And
Mhm.
so if you're finding you have that issue, you can always switch your wealth advisor to a smaller shop that doesn't have those restrictions and where they can invest the way you want them to.
I had this thought. Okay, so we have like the blue can, the recycling can,
Yeah.
and every time I take things out to the recycling can, I feel like I have this thought of like, this is so stupid. Like, like I'm not saying people shouldn't recycle, but I'm like, people do recycle and people go and recycle and they feel good about recycling, not knowing that that's actually not even close to the best thing that they can do for the environment. But everybody does it, and we all have the same experience. Yeah, separating the this from the that. Oh, it's got the little thing on there. I can put it in the recycling bin, and so it's going to go off somewhere and probably not have that big an impact on the climate. But that's your goal, right? And it's funny because we need the 401k recycling bin where people just go out to the recycling bin, right? And they're like, yeah, I'm going to make sure I got the things. I'm going to make more money too, by the way, for my retirement. We need to have
What we need is we
that
need it to
change.
be the default. And that's what, like, right now, the Google employees, it's actually very exciting. These Google employees have been fighting for a climate friendly option for many years. And they actually had a huge win last year where they
Mm,
got one climate friendly option added to their plan. It's an expensive one. It's one of those actively managed, expensive climate friendly funds I was talking about at the beginning. Um, but it doesn't invest in fossil fuels and it votes its shares the right way. It's like actually really fantastic. And so now what they're pushing for is, hey, we also want an affordable climate friendly fund and we also want our default to be climate friendly. So that's kind of like the next frontier. They got the first thing, baby steps. Next, they want this just to be the default. So employees don't have to even log in on day one on the job and choose climate friendly, but just they're defaulted into it. They can always opt out later, log in and opt out, but that's really where we need to be going. And I'm excited to start, offering more products that make that possible soon.
I actually judge my neighbors based upon their distribution of black cans, which is for trash, and green cans, which is for recycling. I got this neighbor two up. He's got three black cans and one green. I gotta go knock on
Oh.
his door. I mean, like, duh,
What are you
what are you
doing, man?
doing? Like, first of all, you only have two kids. Like, what are you guys eating? But because I have two green to my one black. I'm like, see that? I see this. I'm, so I find that I'm judging my neighbors now, and
So
I
funny.
might have to take some action.
We are social creatures. It does show. I mean, like solar panels too. There's like a tipping point in a neighborhood where like, there's the first house that goes solar and then it's like, wait, most houses in this neighborhood are solar. And then it's like, why don't you have solar? Like
Totally.
we benchmark ourselves kind of subconsciously. And all these things are so important. Like you were saying, like the example you're setting for your kids by having solar on your roof. We need all of this to just be normal, right? Like it is
Right.
so possible for us to live in
Yeah.
harmony with nature. It's actually not that hard. If we all have solar, if we all recycle, if we all have electric cars, and if
Yeah.
we all move our money, like we can live in harmony with nature. It's actually a beautiful future to imagine and think about, and it's so possible and within our reach. And I think there's so many narratives of we, inherently can't, humans are against nature and we're just destroying nature and it's just what we do. It's inevitable. And I think that's so wrong. And we are just social creatures, right? And we pay attention to each other. And so each of us taking these steps, it's not just about the impact you're having with solar panels on your roof or the impact you're having by recycling the right way, but it's also that example you're setting and kind of changing the norms all around us. So it just becomes normal for everyone to act this way. And when that happens, we'll be in a really good place.
Alex, is there any questions that we didn't ask you before we, move to wrap up our conversation here today?
I just want to share something that I'm supposed to say every time I do a podcast like this, which is that none of what we're talking about here should be considered investment advice that's specific to your situation. And you should always talk to a financial advisor to learn more before deciding to invest.
All right. Well, wrapping up, we just had a fascinating conversation with Alex Wright-Gladstein of Sphere, founder, CEO. What a fascinating conversation. Alex is bringing climate-friendly choices to our retirement savings accounts. Got one going, many more coming. And she's going to help us all create choices with these significant dollars that can make real impact to the climate. So wonderful conversation with Alex. And again, thank you very much for being on our show.
Thank you so much for having me.